Hello and welcome to a very special episode of AgriFocus, live from Strasbourg in France at the European Parliament today. We'll be speaking to MEPs Sean Kelly and Billy Kelleher about their work at the European Parliament, including environmental schemes within the Common Agricultural Policy and the Mercosur trade deal. MEP Sean Kelly. We're here in Strasbourg at the plenary session of the European Parliament. A lot is happening in Europe at the moment. Predominantly for our audience back in Ireland, they're very interested to know what's happening in terms of the MFF, that's the multi-financial framework, and the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy negotiations. I know that you have taken a specific interest in the environmental aspect of the CAP and ensuring that farmers are funded correctly to take measures to help with the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The MFF and the CAP are at early stages yet. A lot of discussions going on. Only last night I met the Commissioner, good friend of mine, Christoph Hansen, in the corridor. We were discussing it, how things can progress. He was in Ireland last week and he was very happy with his visit. So we will continue on those lines. But in relation to the environmental pillar, I'm the rapporteur for my group on that. And particularly, I think it's important to, first of all, recognise that a huge amount has been done by farmers in relation to the various schemes, and those schemes need to be continued, either as a collective, which would probably be easier for everybody, but also to ensure there's proper incentives there for farmers for the work they do, that it's rewarded, because it's absolutely vital, they're willing to do so, and in terms also of simplification. There's just too much form filling, too much inspectors and so forth. It's essentially giving the farmers the tools to continue doing it and to ensure they're properly rewarded under the next CAP. That's what I'll be doing, because without it, you cannot expect the agricultural sector to be involved like they have been, and at the same time, get no benefits out of it.
And Sean, with the 6 months that Ireland is hosting the presidency of the EU, how important is it during that time that we really use that platform, that influence to, I suppose, ramp up the negotiations and make sure that we get as much as we can for farmers in Ireland, obviously across the EU, but particularly in Ireland?
Well, we will have to be careful in that regard, because once you have the presidency, you're acting on behalf of the entire European Union. So there is an awful lot that's common to the farmers in Ireland and the rest of Europe, particularly in relation to, number one, good funding for the CAP. And if we can make progress in that regard, then we'll be helping Irish farmers, but also European farmers. So that's going to be a key aspect of it. And then the details in relation to the national plans to ensure that they are going to be, first of all, drawn up in a manner that reflects what farmers want. And secondly, in relation to simplification. And one of the things I would like to see in relation to simplification, it's very easy to talk about it, but before any schemes are implemented, I think the farmers' representatives bodies should have a say in their implementation. Because what has happened up until now is the departments drew up the guidelines and the farmers had no choice only to agree with them. And I've seen myself, because we're farming at home, some of them made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And anybody with a practical mind would say, what's the point in doing this? There's no benefit. But just because it was written down in some rule, drawn up in a department, it had to be done. So if you had sign off in advance from the representatives, all the stakeholders, you get a better legislation and better application subsequently.
Absolutely. So while the overall policy might come from the EU, there's that flexibility with the national governments to design the schemes. So therefore, there should be input from farmers then at that level.
Absolutely. And that's the way to do it. And I would hope there'll be proper consultation before the national plans are submitted. And then, of course, once they are submitted, they have to be verified and okayed by the European Commission, which is only right. And then I think if you do that and follow that line of procedure, I think you'll get a very good outcome.
Is there any sort of time frame or timeline for those national plans to be submitted, Sean, do you know?
They have to have submitted, I think, within a year of the decision being made, and then they will be looked at here, and then if there's adjustments to be made, which more than likely there will be, some small adjustments maybe, if the preparatory work is done properly, then we'll be ready to kick off the next CAP and the next MFF in 2028.
In terms of the CAP, Finally, I might ask you, do you feel that it's a bit more this time round in the negotiations of an uphill battle, given the demands of the EU currently in terms of defence and so on, and the way that the world has changed and global geopolitics really? Is there more of a sense of urgency that, you know, you're trying to get as much out of the CAP this time round that wouldn't have been as, I suppose, giving in the past?
Without a doubt. I mean, people just have to recognise the reality. You have the 15% tariffs by Donald Trump, making exports to the US more expensive. You have China with state aid in their own way, everything being essentially subsidised, undercutting all sorts of industries in Europe. You have the war in Ukraine, taking up massive amounts of money, which have to be now got on loans. And then you have the need to develop our own defence. So that's massive money. And then you, of course, also what I'm involved in, developing the grids, which will take 1.3 trillion to ensure that we can move energy around Europe and keep it freer and safer and to have security. So all those issues are definitely there at the moment. But at the same time, there is goodwill to agriculture, food security, like energy security, like defence security are very important. And also, of course, if we simplify matters, then there'll be less costs. And also, I think we need to look at who actually is getting funding for CAP, because there are a lot of people drawing down big funds who aren't actually involved in agriculture at all. And that also has to be faced up with honestly and openly, and take on those who shouldn't be getting the funding. Let it go to those who are actually producing the goods for us. That's the active farmer.
MEP Sean Kelly, thank you very much for your time here with Agriland in Strasbourg. MEP Billy Kelleher, thank you very much for joining us on AgriFocus today, live here from Strasbourg. There are a lot of issues affecting farmers and agriculture in Ireland, which are at an EU level at the moment. So a lot of eyes, particularly coming from Ireland, on the EU. Let's first start with the Mercosur trade deal, Billy, and tell us about the situation at the moment. Today, the safeguards in relation to that are going to be discussed at EU Parliament level. Now, I think a lot of people might think it's all gone away just for the moment because it's being referred to the European Courts of Justice. So what happens today?
Well, the guardrails will be voted on today, and that is in view of the fact that in the event of Mercosur being brought forward and implemented, that there would be specific, safeguards put in place to ensure that market distortion, for example, there would be a scheme in place in the event of that undermining the European market, interfering with the price of beef, etc. So those guardrails are now going to be put in place in the event of Mercosur being brought forward by the Commission in an informal basis.
And these safeguards, farmers say they're not enough. The European Commission would say it has gone further than it has ever gone for any trade deal previously. And that would even be indicative of the reaction by the Mercosur countries in that they are very put out by these safeguards. Are you confident that they will be applied if necessary and that they will be sufficient?
Well, you would much prefer if they didn't have to be applied, but in the event of there being, a major distortion of beef prices, for example, in the event of a Mercosur beef coming in and upsetting the market, that they would kick in then. There was a lot of debate around this, a lot of effort put in by the Parliament, particularly my colleague Barry Cowan, to ensure that in the event of Mercosur coming in to being, that there would be, these real safeguards that are very flexible and that will be triggered at a very low benchmark. The previous proposals were that there would be a higher benchmark required in terms of market distortion, but we certainly got that, I think, more in line with what would be necessary to assure and assuage the concerns of farmers around the particular impact that Mercosur beef could have on beef prices and sustainability.
We've heard a lot about beef prices, particularly we've heard a lot about Brazilian beef in terms of standards and so on over recent weeks. But particularly in Agriland, we're very focused on the facts and what has happened, what is happening and what will happen. And in terms of the market distortion, I mean, there are economists that would say it's unlikely that there will be a huge market distortion. There is already Brazilian beef coming into this market block, the EU block as it is. People, might hear stories or claims that we're going to be flooded, but is that actually a likelihood?
Well, look, there's already 200,000 tonnes of beef coming into the European Union from Mercosur countries, primarily Argentina and Brazil. The Mercosur agreement as signed by the Commission on behalf of the Council with the Mercosur countries is that an additional 99,000 tonnes would come in. That is not a huge volume, but I mean the concerns that are expressed by beef farmers around the potential to distort the price, undermine the market, and equally the concerns around consumers and food safety and efficacy are clear issues that we have to be very mindful of as well. So I mean, the key issue here is, can we stand over the quality of the product? Is it farmed in a way that's compatible with European standards and norms in terms of hormones being used, antibiotic usage, antimicrobial resistance, and the impact that that could have on human health as well? And they're the key issues. Of course, we also have to accept the fact that we import an awful lot of products from Mercosur countries already, both beef, poultry, and also grain and soya, and many other products as well. So, I mean, we have to be conscious that there's already trade between the two trading blocs.
In terms of the referral to the European Courts of Justice and your experience in the EU over recent years, is it likely to take the 12 to 18 months, do you think, or could there be an opinion back from the courts maybe before that?
Well, how long is a piece of string when you are looking at a litigation and interpretations from courts? But I mean, the European Court has already adjudicated previously on trade deals, so I would be of the view that an opinion will come back quicker than what they were talking about, which was 18 months to 2 years. I certainly believe there'll be an opinion before that. Primarily what has happened is it has been referred to the European Court to see is it in compliance with the treaties around the negotiations that were used, how the actual Mercosur agreement was split between the trade element and the political element as well. So these are all the issues that are being referred to the court for adjudication. So look, when it comes back, obviously then we will have to deal with it from that perspective. But let us be very clear, the Commission has the authority from the Council to sign the Mercosur trade agreement on an interim basis, pending the review from the court and then subsequent decisions by Parliament. Bearing in mind the CETA trade agreement has not been formally ratified yet. Many trade agreements haven't been formally ratified yet through the process of national parliaments, the European Parliament. They're on an interim basis. So these things have already happened previously.
And are there any soundings from your colleagues or people that you've been talking to either in Brussels or Strasbourg about whether or not the Commission might provisionally apply the Mercosur EU trade deal before the courts come back with an opinion, if it's obviously ratified by a Mercosur country first, probably Paraguay, but would they be inclined to provisionally apply?
Well, it looks like that the 4 Mercosur countries could actually, adjudicate on this and pass it in their parliaments by the end or by the middle of this year. So if that happens, even if one country ratifies it, well then obviously we have to respond to that. Clearly the Commission has 2 choices. It either doesn't bring forward the Mercosur agreement on an interim basis, or it does. They're the 2 options in front of it. Clearly, we've expressed our views and our concerns around that. It has been referred to the court, but the Commission may well bring forward the Mercosur agreement on a provisional interim basis.
Now, the Commission obviously directs policy in the EU, but parliamentarians do have their own leverage in terms of anything. And while it might be provisionally applied, it will come down to a vote by MEPs such as yourself, possibly in the somewhat mid to long term, but it still will have to be formally ratified by the Parliament.
Yes, I mean, look, these things, are moving all the time in terms of, when will it be referred back from the court with an opinion? Will the Commission implement it on an interim provisional basis? When will the Mercosur countries ratify it? But one thing is definite, we have had trade agreements in the past that have been a very long time on an interim basis. The question here is, what will happen in the next number of months? I'd like to see us at least have an opportunity in the Parliament to have a vote on it again, that we can express the political mandate that was given to us, and that we could adjudicate on it again once it's referred back with an opinion from the court. But in the meantime, we have a job of work to do from an Irish perspective, and that clearly is to ensure that Ireland is an open global trading economy. We have to be more conscious of the broader issues, leaving aside Mercosur, but we have to ensure that the European Union consistently looks to new trade agreements across the globe. We had a recent announcement for India, for example, and while dairy products are not included in that, it will be good for Ireland Inc. And we can't look at Ireland in just a narrow focus. We have to look at it in the overall of the economy. I mean, Irish agriculture is a very strong component in terms of a net contributor to exports. We export about 20 billion per year, so it is quite an important aspect. But so is pharmaceuticals, so is engineering, so is financial services, many other things as well that make up a great ecosystem for the Irish economy. And we certainly don't want to be playing one off the other. I believe we really have to have a strong debate among ourselves as a people as to what we stand for in terms of trade, because consistently there are people who always oppose every trade agreement. And we simply, from an Irish perspective, have to be seen to be open, to be confident in ourselves, confident in what we produce, that we will compete at the highest levels with the rest of the world.
And what about that EU ecosystem? Will agriculture play the poor sister to that ecosystem in terms of the negotiation of the budget for the EU, the MFF, and particularly the Common Agricultural Policy? It has already been reduced this time around, and with geopolitical tensions and circumstances at the moment, demands for defence funding are a lot stronger. How is Irish agriculture, and we are a smaller member state in a larger bloc, how is that going to fare in terms of the lobby for funding for agriculture when you have bigger demands from maybe bigger member states?
Yes, look, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, the EU budget is shrinking in overall terms. It hasn't even been index linked to inflation. So we are at a crossroads, in my view, around how we fund Europe. The Common Agricultural Policy, it has been a reducing budget, expecting to do more with less, simply means that farmers will be getting less in terms of direct payments from the European Union. Now, there's two ways of resolving that. We either increase member states' contributions to the overall European budget, or we allow the European Union, through the Commission, to have some revenue-raising measures put in place, what we call own resources. Otherwise, we're going to be consistently looking at how we cut funding to the Common Agricultural Policy, to cohesion funding, to horizon funding, and right across. And in my view, that is not the right thing to do. We're trying to build a project here that benefits citizens. And one way of doing that is ensuring that schemes have the capacity to improve the lives of citizens across Europe. And predominantly in the context of agriculture, that's through the Common Agricultural Policy. And the idea that we would not allocate additional funding to the Common Agricultural Policy from whatever source we decide, be that through the increased contributions of member states or own resources, means that farmers will suffer. And in my view, that is unacceptable.
I might do another topic at the moment. It's somewhat linked to the EU in terms of our exports. And it's something you've always been an advocate to protect our export industry. Live exports in particular in relation to bluetongue and the bluetongue disease and bluetongue virus. At the moment, obviously not of high risk in Ireland just because of the temperatures for spread, but come April and May, it will become obviously a concern for farmers and particularly for exporters. What can we do as a country, or how is it viewed in Europe for the likes of Poland and other places where they put in clauses, or there could be a suspension, for example, of exports to a trade that's very important for us as an island exporting nation?
Yes, look, I mean, that is always a concern. I mean, at the moment, I mean, the advice from the department is that there's no restrictions on movement other than those immediate herds that have been affected. But as you're right, as temperatures rise and midges start getting active again, there could be a threat to potentially spread bluetongue elsewhere. We have to be extremely vigilant on this, because, I mean, what could happen in the event of countries saying they would not accept live exports, that could have a major implication coming to a calving season, where we shift an awful lot of calves to the Netherlands and Spain and elsewhere. And if that was jeopardized in any way, it could have a real catastrophic effect on dairy farms, both in terms of the pressure on individual farmers and their systems, and also on the ability to move calves elsewhere as well. So we have to be very vigilant on this particular issue.
What is the EU doing? I mean, there has been a proliferation of African swine fever. There was foot and mouth for a while, avian influenza, very significant globally, and bluetongue particularly in the UK and now in Ireland. Agriculture is really being hit here with things outside their control. Is there anything the EU can do to support them?
Well, I mean, and obviously decisions will have to be made into the future. I mean, that would have to be with the best veterinary advice available, not just from an Irish perspective, but from a European perspective in terms of whether or not vaccination programs should be put in place. These are all big debates, but they would have to be done collectively across Europe. We can't have a patchwork of various animal health standards, particularly when you have a movement of animals. Of course, the big challenge is in a more globalized world where there's more travel, both human and transport of animals and products, that you're going to have an increased threat of diseases coming from outside and exotic diseases landing in the European Union. Do we have the capacity to deal with that? It's very much at a national member state at the moment, but I believe we have to be very conscious of trying to develop some European architecture over that to ensure that we can deal with it from a European level.
MEP Billy Kelleher, thank you very much for joining us on Agriland.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for on this episode of AgriFocus live from Strasbourg. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review the podcast and share it with anyone who you think might be interested. Until next time from Strasbourg, take care.